Hello, I'm Larry Wilson. Please join me for another 15-minute Bible study on the Jubilee Calendar. Today is part 5 of 6. There is some debate as to whether Jubilee cycles are 50 years or 49 years in length, and the solution to this problem can be resolved beyond reasonable argument. Please consider 4 issues. The structure of the Jubilee calendar is based on a template of the weekly cycle, and the parallel is obvious. Every 7th day of the week is God's Sabbath day, and every 7th year in the Jubilee calendar is God's Sabbath year. Cycles of 7 days and 7 years are perpetual and are never interrupted. From God's point of view, when Sabbath ends, Sunday, the first day of the week, begins. Therefore, no span of time can come between them. Number 2, we know the Feast of Pentecost, that is the 50th day, was always celebrated on Sunday, the first day of the week. Thus, the 50th day from the wave sheaf offering and the first day of the week were always the same day. And you can see in the little chart, the 50th day always fell on Sunday, the first day of the week. The year of Jubilee is identical. The 50th year of the old Jubilee cycle is celebrated during the first year of the new Jubilee cycle. Therefore, Jubilee years are always Sunday years. Number 3, because weekly cycles of 7 years are perpetual, the Sabbath years and the year of Jubilee become wandering years. They wander through the week like your birthday if a Jubilee cycle is 50 years in length. I have a little chart. Notice, you'll look at Jubilee cycle number 1. Let's assume that the Jubilee calendar began at the time of the Exodus, and so this is the first year, a Sunday year, and here's the first Sabbath year. Okay, we get down to the final week of 49 years. Here's the 49th year, which is a 7th year and a Sabbath year. Then year 50, if year 50 is a Sunday year, but we are observing Jubilee cycles that are 50 years in length, then we start with a new Jubilee cycle, number 2, and we discover that the Friday year now aligns with the 7th year, and the Sabbath year aligns with the Sunday year. That is not the way it works. This is how it works. The 50th year and the first year are the same year, and so the Jubilee cycles are always 49 years in length, but the year of Jubilee is celebrated the year after the Jubilee cycle itself has ended. If Jubilee cycles were 50 years in length, as many people claim, the 70 weeks of Daniel 9 becomes 499 years. 70 times 7 is 490, plus the 9 years for the Jubilee years that you have to insert, and for reasons forthcoming, history will not support this. The book of Ezekiel proves Jubilee cycles are 49-year cycles, and you may want to rewind the video and watch this twice because it's a bit complicated. In Ezekiel 4, God declared the number of years that Israel failed to observe his Sabbath years. Look at verse 5. I have assigned you the same number of days as the years of their sin. So, for 390 days, a day for a year, you will bear the sin of the house of Israel. Verse 6. After you finish this, lie down again, this time on your right side, and bear the sin of the house of Judah. I have assigned you 40 days, a day for each year. God said the total length of apostasy amounted to 430 years. That's 390 for Israel plus 40 for Judah. Now notice, this 430 years is not the same 430 years mentioned in Exodus 12:41. This is 800 years later that God is talking to Ezekiel, who is in Babylon. So we're talking about 430 years, 390 for Israel and 40 for Judah. In 430 years, there happens to be 8 Jubilee cycles of 49 years. 8 times 49 equals 392. Plus, then we have 38 years of the 9th Jubilee cycle. So you see, I've laid out, this is Jubilee cycle number 1, Jubilee cycle number 2, and so forth. And when you add them up, 49-year segments, it amounts to 392 years. Then, we know each Jubilee cycle contains 8 Sabbath years. There are 7 Sabbath years, plus, of course, the year of Jubilee. And I have counted and shown here on the screen 49 years with each Sabbath year at the end of each week. And, of course, here is the year of Jubilee. So there are 8 Sabbath years per Jubilee cycle. Therefore, 8 Jubilee cycles, or 392 years, contain 64 Sabbath years. And the first 38 years of the 9th Jubilee cycle contains 6 Sabbath years, 5 seventh-day Sabbath years, and 1 year of Jubilee. So here's how the 430 years add up. 8 full Jubilee cycles plus a partial produces 64 Sabbath years plus 6 Sabbath years, which totals 70 Sabbath years. Israel violated 70 Sabbath years during a period of 430 years. In other words, Israel totally ignored what God said at Mount Sinai. And when God spoke to Ezekiel, the prophet was in Babylon. He was in exile in Babylonian captivity. The Jubilee Calendar explains why the Babylonian captivity had to be 70 years in length. Let's go back to the covenant that God made with Israel at Mount Sinai. Leviticus 26:14. But if you will not listen to me and carry out all these commands, and if you reject my decrees and abhor my laws, and fail to carry out all my commands, and so violate my covenant, then I will do this to you. I will bring upon you sudden terror, wasting diseases, and fever that will destroy your sight and drain away your life. You will plant seed in vain, because your enemies will eat it. Verse 31, I will turn your cities into ruins and lay waste your sanctuaries, and I will take no delight in the pleasing aroma of your offerings. Verse 33, I will scatter you among the nations, and will draw out my sword and pursue you. Your land will be laid waste, and your cities will lie in ruins. Verse 34, then the land will enjoy its Sabbath years, all the time that it lies desolate, and you are in the country of your enemies. Then the land will rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. Verse 35, all the time that it lies desolate, the land will have the rest it did not have during the Sabbaths you lived in it. Do you get the picture? Do you understand what God promised? God declared that His land would receive its Sabbath rests with or without Israel living in the land. When Israel had violated 70 Sabbath years, God's wrath was aroused, and he removed Israel from the land before the 71st Sabbath year could arrive. He sent them to Babylon for 70 years so that the land could receive its rest, just as he promised. I'm not making this up. Let's go to 2 Chronicles 36:20. Nebuchadnezzar, that is the king of Babylon, carried into exile to Babylon the remnant who escaped the sword, and they became servants to him and his sons until the kingdom of Persia came to power. Verse 21, the land enjoyed its Sabbath rests. All the time of its desolation it rested until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. And you can see Jeremiah's comment in Jeremiah 25, verses 9 through 11. When we add up all that has been said thus far, we find the following to be true. The weekly template consists of 7 days, or 7 years, and the seventh is always God's Sabbath. Number 2, the 70 weeks in Daniel 9 add up to 490 years, not 499, and I will discuss this shortly. Number 3, God promised in Leviticus 26 the land would receive its Sabbath rests with or without Israel's presence. Number 4, God declared in Ezekiel 4 that his people had lived in apostasy for 430 years, and there are 70 Sabbath years in 430 years if we use 49-year Jubilee cycles. The length of the Babylonian captivity was 70 years, and 2 Chronicles 36:21 confirms the land rested for 70 years because Israel refused to keep holy God's Sabbath years. Altogether, these facts prove beyond reasonable argument that Jubilee cycles are 49 years in length. Okay, let's change gears for just a little bit. We have 3 facts now that we can work with. Let's review them. From seminar number 310, we know that Jesus was crucified in AD 30. And when all of the details surrounding the crucifixion of Jesus are considered, there is no wiggle room on the date, 0. God designed it this way because the alignment of the Jubilee calendar centers on Jesus. Number 2, the details already covered in today's study prove that Jubilee cycles are 49 years in length. And number 3, we learned in seminar number 310 that Luke counted the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar to be AD 27. We saw that in Luke 3, verse 1. And according to Luke, Jesus was baptized and began his ministry shortly after Tishrei 1 in the fall of AD 27. AD 27 perfectly aligns with the death of Jesus in AD 30. Now, we have a little business to take care of. We want to align the Jubilee calendar with the death of Jesus. According to Daniel 9:25, the Messiah was to appear 7 weeks and 62 weeks after the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Look at Daniel 9:25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the appearing of Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. Have you ever wondered why God said 7 and 62 weeks? Why not just say 69 weeks? The reason for saying 7 and 62 is profound. 4 decrees to rebuild Jerusalem were issued: 536 BC, 519 BC, 457 BC, and 444 BC. Only one of these decrees occurred at the beginning of a week of 7 years. God gave Israel a huge hint when he said 7 weeks and 62 weeks, and this hint explains this verse in Luke 3:15. In AD 27, when Jesus is baptized, Luke writes, the people were waiting expectantly, and all were wondering in their hearts if John might possibly be the Christ, the Messiah. Of the 4 decrees issued, the one connected to the appearing of Messiah was issued by King Artaxerxes on or about Nisan 1 in the spring of 457 BC. And that's discussed in Ezra 7 and 8 if you care to read about it. If you will consider 457 BC as the decree to which Daniel 9:25 points, then 4 elements instantly line up in perfect harmony. Let's notice. Daniel 9:26 and 27 says Jesus would appear after 7 and 62 weeks, after a total of 69 weeks, and then he would die in the middle of the 70th week. Let's read verse 26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, that is, disinherited as a descendant of Abraham, as criminals were, but not for himself. And then in verse 27, and he shall confirm the Edenic covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblations to cease. The death of Jesus fulfilled the first promise God ever made to mankind. God told Adam and Eve outside the Garden of Eden that he would provide an atonement for sinners, and the death of Jesus also brought sacrifices and ceremonial offerings to an end, just as the prophecy in Daniel 9 predicted. Okay, the second fact, because AD 30 is the year of Christ's death, AD 30 becomes the middle of the 70th week, which happens to be a Wednesday year. Therefore, AD 27 becomes a Sunday year, during which Jesus is baptized, and AD 33 becomes a 7th year Sabbath. Since AD 30 becomes a Wednesday year, 457 becomes a Sunday year. Think about that. Because AD 30 is a Wednesday year, 457 becomes a Sunday year. And if we can go to this little chart, take a quick look at how this works. You're looking here at the 70th week, okay? And you can see it began with AD 27, and you can see that in the middle of the week, which is the Wednesday year, Christ is crucified, which is AD 30, and the Messiah is disinherited as a child of Abraham, as criminals were. And this makes AD 33 the 7th year Sabbath for the 70th week. Here's the 69th week, here's the 68th week, here's the 67th, and so forth. And there's no gap of time between the 69th week and the 70th week at all. When this Sabbath year ended, this Sunday year began. And this is year 43 in Jubilee cycle number 30 since the Exodus. Okay? Now, if we back up to the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, we see very clearly 457 falls as a Jubilee year in the Sunday year, and the 70 weeks start in the spring of 457 BC, when Artaxerxes issued the decree on or about Nisan 1. And this is in Jubilee cycle number 21 since the Exodus. But I've got a few more things for you to consider before we can prove all of this to be true. But in order for the first year of a Jubilee cycle of 7 weeks for 457 to qualify as a year of Jubilee, we need to examine one more point. Only one Jubilee year is mentioned in the Bible. It is the 14th year of King Hezekiah. I'm reading from Isaiah 36, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the defenced cities of Judah and took them. Because of Sennacherib's many victories in Canaan, he became very arrogant and blasphemous toward the God of Israel. His God was a different God, a more powerful God, and he made many insults to the God of Israel. So the Lord spoke to Sennacherib through the prophet Isaiah, saying in Isaiah 37:26, "Have you not heard? Long ago I ordained it. In days of old I planned it. Now I have brought it to pass, that you, Sennacherib, have turned fortified cities into piles of stone." In other words, I gave you these cities to make you powerful so that you could destroy them. They had filled up their cups of grace, and I've brought this to pass and used you as the destroyer. But, in verse 23, who is it you have insulted and blasphemed? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes in pride? It is against me, the Holy One of Israel. God then assured Hezekiah, through Isaiah, that he would take care of Sennacherib, and Hezekiah does not have to worry about Jerusalem being destroyed. Isaiah 37:30. Watch the language. This will be a sign to you, O Hezekiah. This year you will eat what grows by itself. In other words, this 14th year of Hezekiah is a Sabbath year. And the second year, what springs from that? That is, the second year, or Hezekiah's 15th year, would be a year of Jubilee. But in the third year, that is a Monday year, sow and reap, plant your vineyards, and eat their fruit. And as for Sennacherib, the Lord said, therefore this is what the Lord says concerning the king of Assyria. He will not enter the city or shoot an arrow here. He will not come before it with shield or build a siege ramp against it. By the way that he came, he will return. He will not enter this city, declares the Lord. Then the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp. And when the people got up the next morning, there were all these dead bodies. Sennacherib caught on. The king of Assyria broke camp and withdrew. And the Bible says one day soon after, while he was worshiping in the temple of his God, his sons cut him down with the sword. Well, I've gone into this detail because it is widely accepted by historians that Sennacherib came to power in 705 BC. Many scholars, having no knowledge of the Jubilee calendar, say the year of the Jubilee mentioned in Isaiah 37:30 took place in 701 BC. This is great scholarship, but it is not 100% accurate. The death of Jesus in AD 30, a Wednesday year, requires 703 BC to be the Sabbath year, the 14th year of Hezekiah, and it is 702, not 701, that becomes the year of Jubilee, a Sunday year. So notice how this plays out. If AD 30 is a Wednesday year, then 701 is a Monday year, and a Monday year cannot be a year of Jubilee. But if AD 30 is a Wednesday year, and it is, and 702 BC is the 15th year of Hezekiah, and it is a Jubilee year, and it is, then 457 BC also becomes a Jubilee year because These dates are exactly 5 Jubilee cycles apart. Well, I'm out of time. If possible, please watch this video 2 or 3 times. It has a lot of detail. And bookmark and share this video with your friends and proceed to the next segment.